Good evening. Welcome to Zion's Banner. I didn't get to say hi to everybody. Sound should be up all the way, and everything should be set for us to get started. Again, there'll be a bit of a time delay, but that's just the way it is. So we're going to get started in just a few seconds. I'm always starting talking first because I know the time delay's there. Um, I just want to give people a little update as to this weekend, so I'm going to pop that up there. I get to speak at a Southern Baptist church this Sunday, so I'm looking forward to that. About 50 minutes away, so that'll be really neat. Get out of the valley a little bit, Chandler. Um, And so that's just a neat little thing. If anybody happens to be out there who sees this and is in the Chandler area, I invite you to go there. Um, my web page has a Where is Jeff, and there's actually an address, and then there's some additional information. Hey, one of the neat things is the church actually stuck up my YouTube channel. So maybe some night we'll get a few people who see the YouTube channel from hearing me, and they might actually come out and watch this. And I should say put up my YouTube channel because stuck up sounds a little wrong. Okay? So I'm going to go back to camera here and we're going to get started in our lesson. Hey, I talked about how important it is not to separate totally the Christian faith from its Jewish roots in view of some comments by an incredible apologist named William Lane Craig. Well, tonight I'm going to take an objection that Jewish people have about basically that, viewing Christianity as a new religion. And so I'm going to actually take that and do that. So we're going to do that tonight and look at that objection and look at the way it's stated and see the way this really plays out on the streets, so to speak. So that's where we're going. I'm going to bring that up now. Okay. Intriguing title, right? Is Jesus a false prophet according to the covenant at Sinai? And this is a pretty typical objection. And so that should be up. One of the big claims, you're going to see the objection stated in just a second, is this very problem that somehow we can demonstrate, given the covenant at Sinai, that Jesus couldn't possibly be the Messiah because he's not even a true prophet. He's a false prophet. And so that's one of the claims made. Whoops. My PowerPoint's going just a little crazy tonight. I don't know why. It's moved. Oh, there we are. Okay, give me a sec here to get back. There we go. And that's just the intro, but this is a real important issue for Jewish people. So if it flips through for a second or two, I'm sorry about that. Things kind of jumped on me. There we go, but you should see the objection listed. Now, here's the way a Jewish person would say it. Now, what I like about Dr. Brown is he always ends up sticking it the way Jewish people say it. Chosen People's doing an incredible thing in New York. They're having this incredible outreach to celebrate. They usually do it. It's Shalom Brooklyn, but this year it's Shalom New York. I was actually slated to be a part of it, but our account's too low and there were other things going on. And so I'm going to be back in the valley doing some things. But one of the things they're having is a debate between Shmuley Boteach, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, who is a rabbi who debates and against the gospel. He's actually one of the nicest Jewish polemicists you're ever going to meet. He's pretty respectful. He's not like Tovia Singer. He's incredibly respectful. I think him and Dr. Brown actually go out for coffee afterwards, and they're going to debate is the New Testament anti-Semitic. And so they're going to do that, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But there's stuff going on in the valley, and we're part of that. In fact, you're an extended part of that because you're part of the stuff you're doing where you are too. And we have our community and actually transcends physical borders. Isn't that neat? And so here's the way a Jewish person would state it. We have an eternal covenant that was given to us at Mount Sinai. And anyone who tells us to deviate from that covenant is either a false prophet or a false teacher or both. Let's just look at a verse in your Old Testament. What does it say? Remember the law of Moses. That's why we reject Christianity. It's a foreign religion and a deviation from Sinai. So you see the objection there? This is a really, really big objection, particularly among observant Jews. Now, a secular Jew, he's going to give you Jewish identity objections. I'm Jewish, I can't believe that. He's going to give you modern secular objections. He may even give you atheistic objections. But a observant Jew is going to give you objections more like this. And so you see the objection here. This takes us away from Torah. This takes us away from Sinai. That's what God eternally gave us. Jesus is teaching us to move away from God's law and to worship other deities. And so this is a false religion. This is a foreign religion. You see the objection there? And this is why this is so important. Now, we're going to look at this objection, and we're going to actually take it apart tonight. And we're going to look at two red herrings within this objection that are used and get down to the bottom issue of what's really going on here in terms of answering this objection. Okay? In fact, it's often stated this way: Jesus is a false prophet. He taught us to follow other gods, namely the Trinity, including the God Jesus. This is one of my great issues that I love to address is the Trinity because of this very sort of thinking. And it comes up. Now, notice what it says at the bottom of this objection. I hope you all can see this. If you can't, get the PowerPoint, but I'm going to go ahead and read the last line of this objection out of Dr. Brown's Volume 2, Theological Objections. This makes his miracles utterly meaningless. This is one of the red herrings. Okay, Jesus taught us to deviate from Sinai. One of the red herrings is he taught us to deviate from Sinai and the Shema and the worship of the one true God by teaching us to follow other gods. The other is that he just taught us to deviate from Sinai while still allowing us to worship the one true God. So it could take two forms. He taught us to deviate from Sinai, which is the eternal covenant between the Jewish people and God forever. Okay? The other objection is he taught us to deviate from Sinai by teaching us polytheism, paganism, a worshiping other gods. You're going to see a form of this in Islamic sort of circles, but it's not going to be this way. The important thing with this bottom line is that makes all his miracles meaningless. Now, this is why you don't just dump the resurrection on a Jewish person. Okay? William Lane Craig likes to use the resurrection as a main defense for Christianity, and it really is useful. But the problem is, if Jesus is viewed as teaching us to worship other gods, then that miracle becomes utterly useless because it's like the servants of Pharaoh throwing down their serpents and them their sticks and them becoming serpents also. Okay? And so this is like a major thing. So if you start with the resurrection, but these type of objections aren't addressed, the Jewish person will still write off even the resurrection as a false miracle. Now, maybe they won't always do this, but the observant Jew would be very tempted to do this. So the first thing we need to deal with is, did Jesus ever teach us to follow other gods? By the way, notice that the God is being viewed as the Trinity there. We're not going to deal with the oneness of God, because I have material on that, tonight, okay? But the Trinity in no way violates what Israel was given as far as worshiping God, and there's plenty of evidence for that. But let's just deal with it from this way. First of all, one of the important things that's often missed is that Jesus affirmed the Shema. In fact, I absolutely love that he affirms the Shema. Two of the Gospels mention it clearly. Jesus is answering a teacher who asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? Now understand why this question's asked. I'm giving more of those tidbits, okay? The rabbis were constantly ranking the commandments because they recognized that within the law of Moses, or at least allowed within the law of Moses, that there might be a hierarchy. And I would argue, by the way, that there is good evidence for a hierarchy within the law of God. That doesn't mean it's not all the law of God. It means some commandments are weightier than others. And so they were constantly asking this question. And so a scribe comes to Jesus and says, okay, I'm going to give you a shot at answering what the greatest commandment is. Okay? And Jesus gives an incredibly Jewish answer. He goes to the Shema. Now, this formulation of the Shema is a little different than the way it's worded in Matthew. When Jesus recites the Shema again, he ends up expanding it a little according to its meaning. The Jewish idea of loving God with all your heart would include your intellectual faculties. It'd be the core of your being. Okay? And so that wouldn't be forbidden, but Jesus ends up just kind of making it real clear. He requotes it. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and in Hebrew, all your strength. He includes all your mind as the greatest commandment. And the second one is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus is reaffirming the worship of the God of Israel. He's also reaffirming God's oneness. So Jesus wasn't teaching polytheism by any stretch of the imagination. Neither was he drawing attention away from the God and Father of our Lord Jesus, who is the God of Israel. Well, what about his miracles? Now, watch what happens here as we look at his miracles. Great multitudes came to him, Matthew 15, 30 through 31, having with them the lame, the blind, the mute, the maimed, and many others. And they laid them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. Now remember that the statement of the argument is none of the other miracles matter if Jesus taught us to violate the covenant that God had given us and God's revelation to us and taught us to worship other gods. Either of those or a mixture of those would be negations. His miracles would be negated. Okay? So when the multitude marveled and they saw the mute speaking and the maimed made whole and the lame walking and the blind seeing, they glorified who? The God of Israel. Jesus pointed back to the Father. He didn't teach the worship of other gods. He didn't point attention to other deities. He's not like advocating for Moloch here. They glorified the God of Israel. I've been following and so that's the point here. Jesus' miracles never advocate the worship of another deity. All right? Therefore, he didn't use his miracles to point to another God, which in the mind of the Jew would negate all of his miracles and would be false worship. Now remember, the argument here is that Jesus essentially is a false prophet according to Sinai. It takes two forms. He advocated other deities, or he taught us to violate the covenant God had given us, and ended up trying to lead us away from the revelation we had. All right? We've seen that so far, both his miracles and his affirmation of the Shema means Jesus never pointed to another deity. Jesus' teaching never pointed to another deity. He didn't teach another deity. Okay, I took several passages, Matthew 5:16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify who? Your Father in heaven. Now that's a reference back to the God of the Old Testament scriptures. It's also the God of the New Testament. But remember, Matthew is what we're quoting from. The New Testament canon had not been completed yet. Okay? Matthew 5:44 and 45. I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Advocation of Moloch, Baal, any other deity? Absolutely not. For he makes the sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the just and the unjust. So we're dealing with this objection, and basically we see even in Matthew 5:48, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, that Jesus didn't advocate another deity at all, which is part of the charge. We'll deal with the other charge later, but I'm removing the red herrings. Okay? And so I'm removing that charge. One of the red herrings that Jesus taught against the Torah, taught us to deviate from the Torah, therefore his miracles are no good. He's a false prophet according to Sinai, is clearly Jesus advocated the Trinity, so he was advocating a new deity. I've demonstrated through Jesus' miracles being pointing back to or drawing attention to God the Father, okay, the God of Israel. His teaching pointed back to the God of Israel, and he affirmed the central creed that existed within Judaism of allegiance to the God of Israel, that's a red herring. Jesus' teaching in relation to his own deity was not him teaching an additional God or another God. So that's a red herring, and I wanted to get that out of the way. Okay. And so that's red herring. Since Jesus' miracles and teaching point people back to the God of Israel, he can't be advocating other gods. Here's the second red herring, and I want you to get this because you're being exposed to where modern Judaism has ended up going. Okay? This is out of the writings of Moses Maimonides. Judaism today is in its orthodox formulation Maimonidean Judaism, even though the Hasidic Jews would say we don't like it being reduced down to 13 articles. The reality is that they are influenced by Moses Maimonides. When you start looking at the big guys, you have Rashi, you have Maimonides. These are major influencers of Jewish thought. And so Moses Maimonides ends up making a statement here. And the argument for the Orthodox Jews, Jesus caused the Torah to be altered and taught that these mitzvot are true but were already superseded in the present age and are not applicable for all time. And so what Maimonides argued is that anyone who says that presently we're in the age where any of the mitzvot can be altered or changed or superseded is false. That would be a false prophet. That would be a false teacher. All right? The quote is taken from Dr. Brown, but it's out of another writing. All right? Now, that really is an issue. That really is an issue. By the way, not everyone agreed with Maimonides on his 13 Articles of Faith. You need to understand that. I have an entire book that's absolutely great for that. But you do have to understand that he prevailed. Okay, and he influenced Jewish thought. By the way, there's a link between Maimonides and he served as a court physician, so he may have been influenced by Islamic faith, which is really kind of fascinating because now, that wouldn't be really admitted. So, anyway, little sidebars. Let's keep moving. Okay, woo, slow down. Now, let's answer this idea that nothing can change because this is a big issue. Okay? Because the New Testament, I believe, does present a Torah of Messiah. And I think it does end up altering things. We'll talk more about that a little later, okay? But I want to start with a real important thing here. Judaism has already changed the mitzvot. Judaism changed under the rabbis with the loss of a temple. Somebody has done their homework. So, I'm just going to. Okay. So, this claim would have to apply to modern Judaism. That's the first thing you have to deal with. If no changes can occur to the mitzvot, the fact that modern Judaism with its Talmud has changed mitzvot already would also invalidate modern Judaism or rabbinical Judaism. Now, we've started talking about that with the oral law. Okay, that's why that's a good foundational discussion to have around an objection like this. Because if you could say to an Orthodox Jew, hey, look, here's the problem. Yoma 5a says that without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sin. Yet the Talmud allows the blood sacrifice to be replaced. Yoma 5a is quoting Leviticus 17:11. You have a clear mitzvot in Leviticus 17:11 that blood sacrifice is required. You have the Talmud affirming that, and then later on you have the Talmud disaffirming the necessity of blood sacrifice. So who changed what? See, that's the kind of thing you end up dealing with. So you wouldn't necessarily start quite at that speed. That's kind of warp speed, okay? But you have to realize that, when Shmuley says something like this to Michael Brown can say, well, Judaism has changed under the rabbis. Now, maybe we could do a whole session on the sort of thing that allowed or was used to allow for that sort of thing, where that came in. We've talked about it before, but there's a lot of material out there related to these changes. And basically, they're all changes due to the oral law. Okay? But let's talk about something else here. And this is really key to me and absolutely vital. If you're going to understand Hebrews, okay, chapters 1 through 3, you have to understand that the writer of Hebrews is making a case for the greater authority of Jesus for a very important reason. Because he's claiming that Jesus had the right to initiate and bring the new covenant. Remember that these Jews are tempted to go back to the sacrificial system, essentially relying on the ceremonial law of Torah instead of putting their full reliance in Jesus. And the writer of Hebrews is spending 3 entire chapters to demonstrate some important things. There's some background on Hebrews. But he's building a very strong case. There is a comment I do kind of want to address a little. Someone was commenting on not calling the religion of the Old Testament Judaism. And I'm going to say this ignores a continuity. Okay? Because Jesus would have known Judaism as Judaism in his day. I'm going to misspell this, but you'll forgive me. There is a continuity. So I distinguish between rabbinical Judaism and Torah Judaism. and that's what I would say is the best way to get around that. Judah ben Zakkai did alter Judaism. Okay, he did alter it, um, but I would still distinguish between rabbinical Judaism and what came before it, um, because that will create a disconnect from the legitimate continuity that does exist. And it's also going to get you into a nomenclature problem. You'll be fighting about the meaning of words instead of getting down to the real issue, which is how Judaism has changed and by what authority it was changed. Uh, by the way, the writings of the decision of the council that Yohanan ben Zakkai was part of is part of the oral law. And that's why we went through the oral law, because the claim is that oral law was given at the same time at Sinai. So, where we are now is the authority of Jesus. And this is what I think so important about the book of Hebrews, even for the Messianic movement, is upholding the authority and centrality of Jesus. So let me read the comment by Dr. Michael Brown, and then I'll interact with it. The followers of Yeshua. Now that's done deliberately. Folks, when you say Christianity, you do have to understand some okay, there's a good question that I see. I'm going to go back to that. Okay, good. I'm just going to quickly. Um, Pardon the misspellings, guys. I'm not a good typist, especially when I'm typing fast. So hopefully that helps. Dr. Michael Brown says, look, the followers of Yeshua can make a good case for him not only being equal to Moses in stature, for the well-known verse, a prophet like Moses, but even greater, as Hebrews states, Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, testifying to what would be said in the future, but Messiah is faithful as a son over God's house. The writer of Hebrews is doing that deliberately. Okay? Very, very deliberately. And that's the case he's building. Chapter 1, Jesus is deity, so he has authority as deity to give new revelation, the new covenant. In these last days, he speaks to us through his Son, who he appointed heir of all things, in contrast to the previous revelation. All right? He's greater than the angels. Why? Because Jews believe that the covenant that was given at Sinai was witnessed and mediated through the hand of angels. Okay? So, that's kind of where this is going. And then finally, Moses himself and his authority is addressed. All right? Now, I did that for a reason, because even if you concede, you could say, look, here's the thing. Messiah is greater than Moses. By the way, there are rabbinical comments that I could use to prove that Michael Brown has listed and that are in some other places. Alfred Erdeshein's The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, that prove that Messiah will actually be greater than Moses. I can supply those, or we can look at that some other time, but I'm just going to let Michael Brown kind of do the heavy lifting here for me in that regard. But that's terribly important. If we say Jesus ended up changing mitzvot, but I can prove Jesus is greater than Moses, and I can on several grounds, then I can say, even if that were true, that would still be allowable. So we've gotten rid of that. Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's get down to the real issue. And this is the thing I think the Messianic movement needs to get through their heads, okay? Ultimately. And I'm not saying none of them do, because I know great guys in the movement. But then I hear guys doing things they ought not doing. The real issue comes down to who's right, the rabbis or Messiah. And this is why the oral law becomes an issue. Okay? Now, if I say Jesus has authority to go ahead and change Torah, one of the objections I'm going to get is out of Malachi 3, 12 through 14. You would know it as Malachi 4, 4 through 6. The Masoretic numbering's a little different. Okay? Let's look at the background of Malachi. The argument with Malachi, though, I'm going to jump back, is that the Torah of Moses would continue until the coming of Elijah prior to God's judgment. In other words, it would be the only means by which God would work with Israel until the final judgment. And so Jesus couldn't have changed anything because that would be in contrast to the command in Malachi, or the prophetic command in Malachi, not to allow or not to depart from the law of Moses until final judgment. Okay? And so what they'd say is Malachi says, no, nobody can change Torah until the final judgment. Oh, wow. Somebody's birthday. Oh, I can't pass up on this. That's too cool. Happy birthday. Wow. Let me get somebody is with us. I hope you had a great birthday. Dinu there. Oh, yeah, I gotta go ahead and say happy birthday. Hey, folks, somebody in our community had their birthday today. Neat. That is exciting. All right. Does Malachi really forbid any changes at all? That no changes could come before final judgment? Well, let's take a look at this. Okay. Now we're going to start by doing what we should do. Okay. When you're dealing with objections like this, we got to get into exegesis. By the way, I don't think you can separate good exegesis from good apologetics. Now, I'm not saying that the Bible is every argument is about interpretation. I don't want to give that impression, but you know what? Really, you can't have this without good apologetics. Oh, okay. Let's start with when Malachi was written, because the argument essentially is nothing can change until final judgment according to Malachi, and I want to set the background. All right. Malachi was probably a contemporary of Nehemiah. There's some dates given. They have roughly the 5th century BC. The implied existence of the temple. It's more than implied, folks. Requiring date after its reconstruction in 1550. Okay, BC supports this. Compelling evidence dates Malachi. There's substantial parallels that exist between the sins reported in Malachi and those addressed by Ezra and Nehemiah. That's an important little thing that we can do. We can cross-date books by seeing the same exact events being discussed sometimes. The fact that the reforms and certain sins were dealt with by Ezra and Nehemiah after the reconstruction or around the reconstruction of the temple indicates that Malachi is addressing the same thing. That puts it around the same time. Okay? Now, these are some of the same concerns. Nehemiah addresses the corruption of the priesthood, interfaith marriage, abuse of the disadvantaged, and failure to pay the tithe. Malachi deals with that very clearly. The not or failure to pay the tithe is addressed. Issues of marriage are addressed. The priesthood is addressed. So that slide's just backing that up. Here's the setting, okay? You had orthodoxy, but it was a dead orthodoxy because there were too many ethical compromises being made, okay? And it was diluting proper worship. There was a cynicism, there was a religious malaise, and Malachi's prophecy comes up as a wake-up call to renewed covenant fidelity. Now that's important because Malachi is telling them to remember the law of Moses. The detractors from Jesus having the ability to change anything are saying that Malachi is disallowing God to work with Israel in any other way until the judgment. Okay? And so that's essentially what's going on here, and that forms the context. But that's not the context of Malachi, which allows us to deal with the authorial intent. Someone says a scripture means something to me. I say, well, no, that's not what the author intended because this was the situation. This was the time it was being written. The intent of Malachi 4:4, which is really 3 in the Masoretic, okay, remember there was a difference, was to call the people to fulfill their covenant duties within the law and thus remember it, not to remember the law of Moses and allow that there could be no working of God to change any of the mitzvot until the final judgment. So the verse is not stating the Torah, not Messiah, is the primary way of dealing with Israel until the theocratic kingdom. That's not what the author means. Now they're interpreting it to mean that God will do nothing else by way of revelation or redemptive activity until the end, from between the end of Malachi's book and the coming of Elijah. But that's not what the author intends. He's calling his generation to get out of their malaise, get off their duff, and get back to covenant loyalty. That's what's really going on here. The proper understanding is that the coming of Messiah and the inauguration of the Messianic age changes Israel's relationship to the Torah and ours. Now, let me dissect that because that's huge. Okay? First of all, you need to understand something. There's this strange sort of thing where the kingdom is here and not yet. Okay? And so Jesus again indicates, behold, the kingdom of God is at hand. By the way, the Greek comes from a Hebrew idiom. The kingdom of God is with you now. It's right at hand. It's next to you. Okay? Jesus inaugurates the new covenant at the Last Supper. This is the new covenant in my blood. Therefore, do these things in remembrance of me. And so we have the inauguration of the Messianic age. We have the coming of Messiah, and that changes our relationship to Torah and Israel's relationship to Torah. In other words, the new covenant has come. And so the idea that Jesus is a false prophet because he's either advocating different gods or he's changing mitzvot is a red herring, is a false argument because Jesus has the right to make changes. And so a new covenant implies that things are going to change, and the coming of Messiah changes things. By the way, I note in my dissertation that there was room for the coming of Messiah to change things as far as the law. And I quoted a Talmud passage, Nedah, which talks about all the offerings except certain offerings being kept. I believe it's all offerings will cease except the Thanksgiving offering. Okay? I don't have Nedah right in front of me, but I actually end up quoting it in my dissertation. The rabbis acknowledge, and Eliezer Urbach mentions this in the Sages, that there would be changes when Messiah came Since Moses Maimonides did not regard Jesus as the Messiah, he said nothing could change. He also sort of held to actually, it goes beyond that. Moses Maimonides held to the view that the Torah could never be changed at all, but that's not at all what the scriptures state. I was just saying if the book was readily handleable, but it isn't. Shapiro points out that yes, there would be changes. Okay? So that's not even true. Moses Maimonides went further, and there were people that didn't agree with him, and there was oral law, by the way. If the oral law was given at Sinai, Moses Maimonides is in trouble. Because of oral law that doesn't agree with oral law. That indicates there would be changes. And Messiah's come, the new covenant, which is new, has been inaugurated. Therefore, Jesus could make changes to mitzvot. And there is something that supersedes. He wasn't advocating different gods. The difference is we believe, or I definitely believe, the rabbis were not authoritative, had no divine authority, that Jesus is right and the rabbis are wrong in terms of the eternality of Sinai, which, by the way, is one of the 13 articles of faith that God gave us the Torah and there'll be no other. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm just kind of checking as to how things look here. Little shorter than I had planned. But I wanted to deal with that objection because I saw it. And it's a key objection folks in Brooklyn are going to get in New York. And so on both counts, you can't say Jesus is a false prophet because of the Sinaitic covenant. He had the right to change mitzvot. Modern Judaism or rabbinical Judaism changes Torah. Jesus did not advocate other gods. And so even when you remove the red herrings, that doesn't work. I thought there was a question that came up that I didn't address. So I'm just going back through real quick. And I'm going to go to the closing screen and just see. By the way, some of this stuff does really overlap with Islam, particularly the Trinity, as Alan knows, because we've hung out together at an outreach. And so that's kind of where things are at. I'm just going through to see if there's anything, because there was a neat comment kind of made. Yeah, okay. I was looking at a conversation here. There was a dialogue. Okay. Someone was discussing or having a dialogue, um, explaining the discrepancy between modern Orthodox Judaism and classical interpretations in sex. Boy, I'd like to know more about that. That's interesting. Okay. Thanks for the information. Question, brother. Do they believe that when Messiah comes, he will in fact change the covenant? Moses Maimonides did not. He said that Torah was eternal. But when he says Torah, he means the oral and written law. So Moses Maimonides would not believe that the law was going to change when Messiah comes. Now, there are oral law like Neda that says it will change. There were also other commentators that said it would change. By Moses Maimonides, who wrote the 13 Articles of Faith, makes one of his articles of faith that the Torah will never change. And this is one of the chapters that one of the articles of Moses Maimonides that Mark Shapiro takes issue with in the limits of orthodoxy. So this is really an important comment. Excellent question. Someone asked, how does Jeremiah 31 fit in for Jews? Real great question. Okay. And this is a real sticky point. I was doing a meeting once and I mentioned the new covenant, and I had a Russian woman stand up who was Jewish and said, there is no new covenant, there is only Torah. Jews don't do much with it. They really don't. Jewish people need Jeremiah 31 pointed out to them. Generally, the responses are, boy, I'm trying to think. I rarely get responses. When I bring up Jeremiah 31, it's usually there is no new covenant, there's only Torah. And so that's usually what I would generally get. An Orthodox Jew might argue that the new covenant could not have come yet, because they might argue that the new covenant is tied to the actual theocratic kingdom. Or they might go to Isaiah chapter 2. The law will go forth from Zion. That's a response that's highly possible. The Torah is the word for law there, and they would say, well, the Torah will go out from Zion in Isaiah 2. I can turn to it, read it to you, and I could tell you the way they might very well use it, because it's a real possible response. This is off the top of my head a little, because I haven't seen every response possible, but I'm thinking of where they might go very quickly. Here we go. Isaiah 2, if you're still here. Now it will come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all the nations will flow into it. Many people will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the law from Jerusalem. So they might argue that since the Torah will go forth from Jerusalem when the kingdom is restored, that there could be no new Torah. Now, I have at least one rabbinical passage that's in my dissertation. I can't bring it to mind, that says the law that will go forth from Zion is a new Torah. So there is a counter even existing within the rabbinical writings. By the way, I've gotten this in the Messianic world, or in the Hebrew roots movement, where they'll go to the Torah will go forth from Zion in the last days. Therefore, all Christians need to follow the Torah, because it's what the nations will be following anyway. And so the church just needs to get its act together and follow the law, because, see, that's what will be followed anyway in the future. And Hebrew roots movements use this all the time, and that's why I addressed it in my dissertation. But the answer is that the law that goes forth from Zion doesn't have to be the Torah of Moses. It could be the Torah of Messiah. And that's where I think Dr. Brown might very well go. And he would support it with some of these rabbinical passages. If I had Shapiro's book right in front of me, and I'm looking for it because I've been using it for my... I found it! All right. Yay! I can answer this question really well. Hang in there. Hang in there, because this is really cool. I can quote right from... Let me put this up here for a second or two here. This is a really useful book because it's really a critique of Moses Maimonides' 13 points. And it can be gotten from Amazon, and I can stick that up again. But let me just go to the passage, because I can actually deal with this right from these rabbinical passages and quote them to you. So if you guys will hang in there for just a second, okay, I will actually go there. and point these out. You know, sometimes for me, it's I know it's there. Um, okay, but I don't necessarily remember the exact Talmudic passage. The eternality of Torah. Here we go. Okay, Nadas 61b is one place. But here's the comment related to Isaiah 2. Rabbi Eben ben Kahani proclaimed, "The Holy One, blessed be he, said, a new Torah shall go forth from me. That is, a new Torah shall issue from me." Uh, Yal, Yalkut Shimoni speaks of a new Torah which will be given by Messiah. So now it's not written by a Christian. I have to let you know the ironic thing is it's written by an Orthodox Jew. I might be able to put the USBN up if you give me just a second. Mark is spelled with a C. But let me see if I can get the USBN up, because then you could search for it on Amazon, which would be perfect. Here, I'm putting up the USBN. I mean, not the USBN, the ISBN. Oh, sorry. ISB. I'm typing ISBN. I'm putting the ISBN number for you. Okay, I've got the ISBN. I'm going to stick the name up real quick. I'm going to need both hands to type here. So I'm going to put the book down. Okay. Roxby got it. Okay. Hey, Roxby, you want to throw, if you got it via Amazon, you want to throw a link up, you can. That would be great. Real useful, credible Jewish source. I use him extensively. There are a few other sources out there, but he actually just goes through the 13 articles of Maimonides and points out rabbinically where the problems are. So, oh, I'd love to be in on the conversation. Uh, uh, oh, my dear sister Chandler is having here, where a Muslim spends his time trying to amplify the discrepancies between some Messianic Jews, Orthodox Christianity, on matters concerning the law and Trinity. Oh, I'd love to be in on that conversation. That would be so fun. That would be just a blast. I would love to. Oh, wow. That would be a great conversation. Hey, I'm going to say something right here. Um, Real quick here. Um, I'm going to say, make me aware of some of his arguments, and we can address them. I'm going to say I can address them. Okay. Because this would be fun. This is great material. So I'm going to just kind of pop that up there. Because that would be absolutely great. That would be a fun discussion. And that would be really great. So, all right. Those are good questions. But if any of those, because I've seen Muslims try and use Jewish objections against Orthodox Christianity on matters of the law and Trinity. That's how I got involved with Islamic apologetics, was actually through Muslims using some of those objections. So that's a great conversation, and we can use some of that material. All right. Okay, excellent. Okay. Alan points out the crossover. Muslims are in love with Tovia. Yes, and it's disgusting that Tovia's helping them. And that's one of the reasons I want to deal with Jewish objections. It's one of the reasons that the Strong Tower Conference next year, I'm slated by the grace of God to actually be involved with the Strong Tower Conference that George puts on. So, yeah, be glad to deal with it. Tovia's got some really nasty stuff out there, and I'd be glad to deal with it. So, yeah, Tovia's bad news. I have a lot more respect for Shmuley Boteach than I do Tovia, because Shmuley's kind of a gentleman, and Tovia isn't a gentleman. So, I'm doing the Jewish thing with my mustache. Sorry about that, guys. It's hanging around too many old Jewish guys, you know? Um, wait a minute. I am an old Jewish guy. Um, so, okay, yeah, we can definitely. Agreed. I'm just typing. I'm just saying, I'm just sticking this in. So I'm just sticking this in. One of the reasons I really like being just one more reason why I really like um, being involved with Islamic apologetics is just that I see the tie-in. So um, thank you, Alan, for that. It's one of the just one more reason why I like being involved with Islamic apologetics is that I do see crossover and I can be useful somewhat there. Okay, and someone threw up the link, so thanks. Uh, uh, okay. Okay. There we go. Excellent. Alrighty. Well, we've had a good conversation, which has really been cool, and some excellent discussions about the connections. Ha ha ha. Alan threw something cool. Bart Ehrman plus Tovia Singer equals Islamic apologetics. Ha. Okay. Now I know. Islamic objection apologetics is such an interest. Oops. Sorry. Okay. I'm going to even stick a smiley face. Cool. All right. All 12. Oh, contextual criticism. Yeah. Yep. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. All right. Well, guys, tomorrow night, uh, Matthew through Jewish eyes. We're done with the genealogy. We're going to look at the virgin birth, an objection to the virgin birth, and the issue of betrothal, a few things around that pericope, and take a look at that. So that's where we are. Come join me for the end of Matthew chapter 1 tomorrow night, if you are able to. Okay, well, I'm going to say goodnight, all. Tell my family that they can come down from upstairs. They're all hiding up there, so I could have the office and the high speed. And I will be with you tomorrow night. If you don't see the notification yet, I have to go back in and kind of set up the event over again. So that's where things are. But it will be going on. I posted it on Facebook. And tomorrow morning, I should have the event information all up. So if you're getting notifications, you'll know about it. Okay. Alrighty. Good night, all.